Then the number 4 on the agenda is correctional retirement plan expansion. The legislation proposed by Senator Hayden and Representative Nelson. And I think the rest of the group must be here to testify on this. On the list, I had Mr. Keith Carlson, who cannot be here tomorrow. Are you here? There he is. Yeah. Then should I just go down the list?
More than 15 minutes, easier for maybe, and that was how long
Welcome to the Pension Commission.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I appreciate the Chair and the members accommodating my schedule. I have an all-day meeting up in St. Cloud tomorrow.
Okay.
Madam Chair, just to give you a brief introduction regarding what this legislation does, is it provides for essentially early retirement.
Would you identify yourself for the tape, please, again?
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. Keith Carlson with Minnesota Inter-County Association, that consists of 13 of the larger and growing counties in Minnesota. A handout is being passed out that contain my comments, and I'll just get going given the time. To just briefly tell you what House File 884, Senate File 998 are about, is it basically expands the correctional plan to probation officers, to 911 dispatchers, and certain Hennepin County security guards. Currently, that membership consists of corrections officers who serve in local correctional institutions, jails, and other incarceration facilities. Basically, the benefit derived by going to that plan is that they would receive a full pension at age 55 without actuarial reduction once they are fully vested. Otherwise, as members of the general plan, which they are currently, their full pension would be received between ages 65 or 66, unless they qualify for the Rule of 90, in which instance it would be earlier. Perhaps unintended, but nevertheless, what would happen is the contribution for the employee would also drop, despite the fact that their benefit would be increased. The current contribution to the PERA general plan for employees is 6.25%. It would go down to 5.83%. The issue, obviously, for their employers, counties and cities, is that this would add to pension costs on top of other costs that were already occurring because of recent changes made by the legislature. These include the increase in the contribution rate for employers for PERA, police and fire, 14.1 to 16.2% over the next 2 years. That's costing counties $3.9 million. And the potential that the PERA general plan will increase its contribution by up to 0.5% between employees and employers combined, which, if fully implemented, would cost county employers another $4.2 million. This is occurring all the time that we're trying to hold down our property taxes, in part due to the legislatively imposed levy limits on us. I think a further concern that the Pension Commission needs to concentrate on is what effect would it have on the funding of the plan. While the funding, according to the staff of the correctional plan, is stable, its funding ratio has been declining in recent years. It's gone from 96.5% to 90.98% between 2011, and the contribution deficiency during that same period has declined from 1.16 to 0.26% of payroll. Nobody knows exactly what will happen if it were expanded to these individuals, but the possibility exists that it would be detrimental to that funding. I think the larger issue is are you really prepared to step on to what I think will be a slippery slope? This bill only applies to probation officers and 911 dispatchers who are employed by local governments who are covered by the PERA currently. But they're individuals who work for the state who are currently covered by MSRS general plan who work in essentially identical positions. In a number of instances, they would work side by side with these individuals. And there's over 300 state probation officers and 911 dispatchers. If you were to basically do the same thing at the MSRS level, put them into the MSR correctional plan, it would cost the state over $1.1 million annually. And you should be cognizant of the fact that the MSRS plan's funding is significantly worse than PERA's. Its current funding ratio is about 68.5%, and its contribution deficiency is currently over 4.5% of payroll, although changes made in 2010 are scheduled to reduce that by about 3%. Okay, the other issue is, again, the slippery slope. There are plenty of other PERA and MSRS employees who also work in stressful and hazardous jobs. County and state highway workers. I think you all noted in the news recently there was just another MnDOT employee who was injured while doing highway maintenance. Public health and social workers at the county level. Basically, they serve the same households that contain probationers. So they basically take on the same risks. In Anoka County, public health nurses logged exactly the same number of client assaults as probation officers in that same county did over a 12-year period. So they are subject to the same risk, and certainly I would think is likely if the early retirement benefits were extended to this class of individuals would come forward and say, what about us? I'll also point out the fact that probation, individuals on probations generally do not present a credible threat to public safety. They've already been arrested, apprehended, they've been convicted, gone through their judicial proceedings, have served their jail time if that was called for in their sentence, and basically they're waiting to complete their probation, because if they do not, they will be sent back to jail in many instances. 4 out of 5 of the 116,000 individuals on probation at the end of 2012 had committed nonviolent or property crimes instead of crimes against individual. Over 44,000 of those were DWI offenders. The lion's share of probationers are frankly compliant. Even the worst of those offenders, those who have been convicted of felony-level offenses, 3 years after their probations have been completed, 86% of them have not reoffended. I'll finally give you some statistics based on the injury rates from several of our counties. And frankly, this bears to the fact that the hazard is, in our opinion, overstated. In Sherburne County, over the last 4 years, deputies suffered 10 injuries at the hand of clients. Corrections officers, those individuals covered by the current correction plan, suffered 13 injuries. Probation officers during that same period suffered 0. In Anoka County, over the last 12 and a half years, deputies suffered 4 injuries at the hands of clients. Corrections officers suffered 6. And probation officers suffered 1. Finally, it's not on my sheet, but I recently got information from Dakota County, basically the same pattern. The corrections officers, current members of the correctional plan, suffered 18 injuries in the last 3 years at the hands of clients. Deputies suffered 3 injuries at the hands of clients during the same period. Probation officers out in the field suffered 0. In conclusion, we think the underpinnings of the bill simply are not there. Cities and counties are bearing substantial new costs for pension-related changes that are made recently, and frankly cannot afford to fund this additional benefit at this time. That'll conclude. Be happy to answer questions.
Any questions for Mr. Carlson? Thank you very much.
Thank you again for accommodating my schedule.
Bruce Kimlinger, Ramsey County Probation Officer. Welcome, Mr. Kimlinger. Just restate your name, please, for the tape.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and representatives of the committee. My name is Bruce Kimlinger. I'm a Ramsey County Probation Officer. I'm from St. Paul. I grew up in St. Paul. I currently live in North St. Paul and have raised my family there. I've been a Ramsey County resident my whole life. I've been a probation officer for 20 years, and I've worked in corrections for 35. Just some comments about what we do. I love what I do for a living. It's a very rewarding job in its own way, but it's also a very difficult job. I'd like to think we're the third and kind of least flashy segment of the criminal justice system. The police do their thing, the courts do their thing, and then we do ours, and we're in with offenders for the long haul then. The probation terms for a felony are typically 5 years and can be much longer than that. We work with offenders for a very long time. It's an important job, and it can be a difficult job. It's where people actually do make changes. The previous gentleman made some comments about how successful most people are on probation, and I'd like to take some credit for that. I think we do a very good job with our offenders. Most of our offenders do succeed on probation and do not reoffend, but that's the part you don't hear about. But the job itself can be very stressful day to day. We deal with difficult people, their daily situations, their problems become our problems. We have to make very difficult decisions every day. We must balance the need for public safety, the safety of victims, the concerns of victims, restitution to the victims, rehabilitation, and punishment. Every day we tend to make decisions about whether we should get a warrant issued or not, get somebody picked up and held in custody or not, and returned to prison or not. Those can be difficult decisions. We're not just affecting offenders, but we're affecting their families, we're affecting victims and the rest of the community. This is a big change we're talking about coming up. Rule of 90 meant probation officers could typically retire between age 56 and 60. And most of my colleagues at my age have Rule of 90. I don't, because I started a little bit later. But there's a whole generation coming up that are now going to have to work till they're 66 to get their full pension. That's going to make for a big change. We typically have not had probation officers working into their 60s, and now there'll be within the next decade or so, there'll be the beginnings of a very large group that will be expected to. The penalties to retire early, earlier than 66 are pretty significant, 6% a year. That means people are going to pretty much try to hang in there until they're 66 years old. A typical career that was probably 34 or 35 years will now become 44 years, or slightly less than that. That means we're going to have a significant number of older probation officers, a much greater number at the top of the salary scale, earning the maximum vacation time, the maximum amount of sick time. That has to be a negative effect on budgets. There'll be a greater number of caseloads disrupted by absent probation officers. We always struggle to fill in for a probation officer who's on vacation. We don't have built-in replacements for probation officers who are gone. The longer they're going to be gone for these things I mentioned earlier, the harder it will be for us to fill in behind them. That does become a concern for public safety. We will not be as quick to respond to issues with our offenders. A second reason why it's a bad idea to have many probation officers in their 60s is we're going to squeeze out aspiring and younger probation officers at lower salaries and benefits, and who frankly in some ways by the time they're 30 or so do a better job. Once they've gained some experience, they're more invested in the job, they have longer to work, the future means more to them, and they're better probation officers at that age. Times and the job change. My 20 years, I found that we rely more and more on technology. There's been a whole new approach to working with offenders. It's in general called best practices. A much greater emphasis on closer supervision of more high-risk offenders. Just older probation officers are less adaptable to those kind of changes. Younger probation officers are more innovative, they're more adaptable, and they want to be involved in the change. They're more active in committees that formulate these kind of changes. Next item, there's been a much greater emphasis on probation officers working and being visible in the community. Standards have changed to increase the required number of home visits, work visits, and other field visits. As a result, safety has been a greater concern. Probation officers now have annual training in office and field safety and self-defense. Probation officers in our county, and I know others also, are required to wear bulletproof vests, carry mace, and work in teams of 2 when doing their home visits and other community visits. Again, older probation officers are just less adaptable to those kind of changes. They're at greater risk of injury than younger and healthier probation officers. Finally, for me, like law enforcement, firefighters, paramedics, and others, this can be a tough job. We're working close up with difficult people. We're exposed daily to some of the worst of human behavior. There is a burnout factor. There are related safety and health concerns that rise with age. We already are running into a situation, I think, because of the economy in the last few years, that probation officers, even with Rule 90, who could retire as early as 56 if they started at 22, are staying longer. They're working longer. They have kids in college. They have medical insurance issues. They're staying around longer as it is. This is just going to create a whole new bubble of probation officers that are going to work well into their 60s, and it's not a good thing. Thank you.
Okay, all right, thank you very much for your comments. I'd like to bring up the I'm sorry, some questions. Representative Murphy.
Thank you. Mr. Kinlinger, this bill isn't new this year. And over the years, I've talked to probation officers about becoming part of the correctional plan. But I've never had, in my discussions, I've never had the other groups that are in the bill that's going to be before us or is before us already included. How do you feel about that? Would you rather go it alone or have this additional groups that need to get in too because of their stressful jobs?
I think it's fine. I think they have a lot of the same concerns we have and deal daily with a lot of the same kind of stressors we do. Hennepin County security officers and 911 operators, they're also dealing with a lot of the same very difficult decisions from hour to hour each day in their job and face a lot of the same pressures, the same burnout factor. I don't think we also want 911 operators and security guards into their 60s still working.
Madam
Representative Murphy.
Mr. Kinlinger, do you have any ideas? The time for us right now isn't really great for widening the numbers of people
retirement
that are being served by the various plans. And we're trying to stabilize our pension plans. And although the correction plan today is pretty stable, with the advent of statewide, city, county, and state people that are suggested to come into this plan, how do you have any recommendations of how this commission should think about the increased liabilities to the correction plan and how we can make up the difference?
Well, Madam Chair and Representative Murphy, this is not my area of expertise. However, I think because of Rule of 90, that most of those at my age in their 50s that are still working have Rule of 90, and they're going to retire anyway. It's the group that's now in their 40s, roughly, that started in their 20s that don't have Rule of 90. So this isn't going to really come to roost for another 10 years or so. It will be a very, very gradual change over the next 10 years because those that have Rule of 90 are eligible to retire anyway, and they're going to retire. It's a very, very small group at first. It's those of us that started in their 30s probably are now in their 50s, don't have Rule of 90, and are expected to have full retirement not until 66. That's a very small and gradual group. Even myself, I wouldn't retire yet. If this passed, I can't. I still have college expenses with kids. I'm in a similar situation to a lot of people. So I got to believe the change is going to be very, very gradual and small to start.
Representative Murphy.
Thank you for your input.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd like to bring up the two county 911 dispatchers together, Kelly Callahan Anega, and Elizabeth Rother. Any other 911 dispatchers? Okay. Thank you. Welcome. If you want to just repeat your names for the tape, please, in case I massacred them.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, my name is Kelly Callahan Anenga, and I'm a 911 dispatcher with Scott County. I've been employed for approximately 17 and a half years. I started dispatching at the age of 30. With the current pension plan, I will have to work until I'm 66 just to be able to survive. That's obviously too old. At the age of 47, I already have some permanent hearing loss due to job hazards from the radios and things. We have a dispatcher that's in her 30s that is suffering from medical issues diagnosed as occurring from the stress that has occurred from her job. She's only been on the job for 3 years. As a citizen, I want to know that if I need the 911 service in the future, that I'll be sure that somebody is on the other end and able to handle my call and know what to do. We've been working short-staffed for 2 years. We're working mandatory overtime, and 40 hours a week is plenty for this job. I ask that you remember that we live the calls also. We're there 24/7, so when everybody else is enjoying Thanksgiving and Christmas with their families, please remember our staff has to be working. We've had a horrible time with retention. We've had 7 people out of 14 dispatchers resign in the last 2 years. This is a huge expense to the county. I do believe that increasing our pension so that they have that opportunity to retire early would keep that retention, which would help with covering some of the costs of these people retiring at a younger age, as Representative Murphy had asked previously. I think if we're able to actually retain people longer, this will help. And that helps with us with retention of continuously training people and have them leave shortly after completing their training, prior to their probation being done, being let go, and not even completing their probation. We suffer from the stress of the calls. One of my fellow dispatchers was on a call with a paraplegic that was burning. She was talking to him. He was unable to speak and unable to give an address where he was located. He did not make it, and she suffered a lot of trauma from this. She has to wonder if every time she answers the phone if it's going to be a similar call. We had another dispatcher that took a call of a man that had shot his son with a bow and arrow on a hunting trip. The male was intoxicated and under the influence of illegal drugs. This dispatcher had just returned to work after delivering 2 premature twin males, and she was watching them struggling to live daily, and she had to deal with the impact of this small child being shot by his father. Ask you to imagine the voice of a woman who discovered that her husband of 50+ years had just found him no longer breathing. Or the mother of a child with cancer, and she goes up to see how he's doing in the morning, and he's passed away in his sleep. Another one of our dispatchers resigned and chose a different career path after taking a call of a female that had been stabbed multiple times by her boyfriend's brother. She heard that woman take her last breath on the phone. Where the dispatchers that were working one cold, slippery New Year's Eve when one of our officers was responding to a domestic call. He hit black ice, went airborne into a tree. A tow truck driver saw it and dialed 911. Not only the stress of one of our officers being injured, but to hear the stress of his partners as they were trying to get him out of the damaged squad car to see if he was alive. He did have a serious traumatic brain injury and is still unclear if he will ever be able to work as a police officer again. My most memorable call is the call that I received from a 16-year-old male stating that his mother and father were arguing because the mother wanted a divorce. Because of the escalation of the situation, I had the 3 children leave the residence and go to a neighbor's house. Before he had left, I asked if there were any weapons in the residence, and he said no. On arrival of the officers, they heard gunshots, and they found blood all over the garage floor. I'm the one that kept contact with this male for 5 hours, trying to get him to surrender and come out of the residence, trying to find out how his wife was doing, what had happened to her. And I was also dealing with his ups and downs of his feelings and trying to get him to calm down as he realized what had just happened. The incident ended up as a homicide-suicide. I did not sleep for a month after taking this call. I still feel anxiety with every domestic call that I take, hoping and praying it will not have a similar ending. Statistics currently show that burnout of a dispatcher occurs after just 2 years. Yet statistics also show that only 10% of the total population have the skills necessary to perform a 911 dispatching job. We need to allow the people that are in this position to retire in a reasonable time frame and keep our citizens safe and offer them the level of public service they deserve as taxpayers. And I do believe that approving this bill will help.
Thank you very much. Ms. Rother.
My name is Elizabeth Rother. I'm a Minneapolis Police and Fire Dispatcher, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. 13 years ago, I started as a 911 operator in the city of Minneapolis. There were 9 of us in my starting class. By the time we celebrated our first year anniversary, we were down to 4. Within a couple of years, we were down to 3. This is pretty typical for my department. I've seen so many people come and go in those 13 years. I don't remember names, and I can't even tell you how many have gone. I can count, however, the number of retirements I've seen, and that's on one hand with fingers to spare. During these years, our department has had some pretty memorable events that have made the news. The 35W bridge collapsing into the Mississippi River, the active shooter at the accident signage, tornadoes that destroyed entire neighborhoods. While I remember these events with frightening accuracy, they are not my most memorable calls. Those events are thankfully once in a lifetime. It's the daily calls that drain our bodies physically and mentally. I've watched in horror on a coworker's face when hearing the scariest words a dispatcher can hear, "Officer down," but didn't hear any anxiety in their voice when they responded back to get as much help as they could get out there. I felt the tension run through my whole body as officers called for backup because I dispatched them to a disturbance, and a neighbor saw the squad car and started shooting at the officers. We're now ducking for cover, screaming for help. We as 911 aren't out on the street, but we feel the same stressors as our partners, the police officers, the firefighters, and the ambulance crews do. I've seen and been the employee who got in their car at the end of the day just thankful no one died on their watch, despite multiple shootings and stabbings and fight calls that filled that shift. It's a small amount of the mental strain that we all feel from this job. Our personal lives are put on the back burner so we can help each other or each and every 911 call to the best of our ability. Physically, we're under more demand as technology gets more advanced. Just at my desk, I have 6 computer monitors, 4 keyboards, 4 mice, a handset, a headset, foot pedals, and a bank of speakers in front of me. The repetitive stress injuries on our arms and hands have ended some of our careers before we can even look at retirement. The continuous yelling in our ears from callers, the constant radio traffic causes our hearing to diminish every year. Not being able to leave your station because of a volatile situation causes some people more personal medical problems. As humans age, our reaction time slows, our hearing fades, and our eyesight fails us. The saying, "you can only be at one place at a time," is true for the people out on the street. The firefighter can only fight one fire at a time, and the EMT can only do CPR to one person at a time, versus our voices are out on every radio call, no matter if they're all going on at the same time. We're all out on every single call that's on our screens. We've been called the silent first responders and the first responders, but a lot of times I think we're the forgotten first responders. Most people remember the officer who caught the criminal, or the firefighter who carried the baby out of the house that was burning, or my personal memory of the EMTs that saved my husband's life. I didn't choose to become a 911 operator because I wanted to be a hero, but our job is extremely important and a huge part of the first responder system. I think we should be treated equally with them on retirement, and I think it serves the citizens if we are. Thank you.
Thank you, both of you, very much for your excellent testimony. It was very informative. I really appreciate it. It's a tough job. I think think I didn't realize how tough a job it was.
Come visit us. You're more than welcome.
Exactly. We'd love to have any of you sit in.
Yes, Representative Murphy.
A few years ago, we passed a bill that made first responders essential employees. Are you also members of the union?
We are. I'm members of Teamsters.
Ms. Eniga.
Madam Chair and Representative Murphy, I am a member of AFSCME at the current moment.
Testify.
Yeah.
Representative Murphy.
And then Ms. Callahan, and then you said, you talked about the 24/7. Does one dispatcher work 24 hours?
Ms.
If-
Callahan and Enga.
On a regular, on a, not a usual day?
Madam Chair and Representative, no. Currently, we are scheduled for 10-hour shifts, but because of our staff decreasing, we are currently working 12 to 14-hour shifts, and then coming back the next day.
And Madam Chair,
Representative Murphy.
I don't want to go on and on about this, but then, is that a county imposition to make up for costs, or because of the shortage, they can't hire anybody else at this particular time, or something like that, or
Madam
is that
Chair.
a usual occurrence? And you talked about overtime, too.
Madam Chair and Representative Murphy, yes, it is because we are unable to retain employees. And I do believe, as I stated too, the cost in getting employees to stay will help us with relieving money and that we're spending on training, and also our overtime money that we are spending right now just to fill the shifts to have our minimum requirements covered for each shift. As we work during the day shift, we only have 3 dispatchers on. If one needs to use a restroom, we're down to 2 dispatchers. So we really don't even get a break. You can't take a break, or all the stress is put on your partners to handle everything going on in the room. And we work straight, 10, 12, 14-hour shifts. We can get up when it's quiet to go to the bathroom. If time permits, we can go into the little kitchenette that's attached right next to us to prepare our meals.
I've seen, but your
Representative Murphy.
situation was seems to be more stressful than what I saw.
Okay. Let's, thank you very much. Let's move on to Marie Smith, Hennepin County Security Officer. And is there anyone else on the list or in the room who, come forward, Mr. Smith, who cannot come back tomorrow morning? We're running a little late. So I really like to wrap up after Mr. Smith then, and then continue with all these topics tomorrow morning. Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members. My name is Maurice Smith, and I represent the Hennepin County Security Division. Hennepin County Security Officers, I like to say, first of all, we're the first line of defense for the 4th Judicial Court. We conduct weapon screening at all the courthouses, so we are the first line of defense. As a Hennepin County Security Officer, we do on a daily basis provide medical, safety, and welfare checks for the residents and employees and guests of Hennepin County. We assist law enforcement agencies within the county. On a daily basis, we are physically involved in domestic disputes, the common street fight, and physically taking someone into custody with wants and warrants. Our training is equal or surpass to most law enforcement agencies. We are licensed in medical first responders. We also have crisis intervention training to deal with mental health issues as we come across clients of the county. We respond to calls, some of them hazardous, which would be like fires, unidentified fumes in buildings, car accidents within the area. As the Hennepin County Security Division grows, we also have a patrol division that patrols throughout the county. And then those patrol officers also respond to calls within the county, where there may be abandoned buildings where someone is hurt or injured, or car accidents on the roads, anywhere on the roads of Hennepin County. As things grow and the times get harder, we also deal with those members of the military who comes out with PTSDs, and mental health issues. And with dealing with some of those issues, we deal with some of those people who want to commit suicide. So we respond to calls of suicide with some of the county residents in Hennepin County. As of late, if you know of terrorism, it's not just limited to Al-Qaeda and all of them. We deal with bomb threats also. And dealing with those bomb threats, we work with the local law enforcement agencies to ensure that the residents and guests of Hennepin County are safe. As we grow older, as the 911 dispatchers have identified to you guys, as we grow older, our senses get slower, our reactions get slower, and we cannot do the job as well as we do now at the age 62 or 66. In conclusion, I really think you guys could consider adding us to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for Mr. Smith? All right, thank you all for coming, and thank you for your testimony. I appreciate the flexibility of the members and the audience, and we will continue then with these 3 items on our agenda with further testimony and discussion tomorrow morning at 9. Committee is adjourned.